Have you ever thought about making a quilt? You've got fabric, a sewing machine, thread, and you think, this can't be too different from sewing clothes, right? Well, not exactly. Today we're diving into two major branches of sewing, garment sewing and quilting. They both use fabric and thread, but trust me, they are two different skill sets. And knowing these differences up front can save you a ton of frustration, wasted materials, and time. So stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Hi, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. And if you like what you see, please click that subscribe button. If you're a garment sewer, you are probably familiar with a whole world of fabrics. There is rayon, knits, silk, cotton, flannel, denim, and the list goes on. Each one behaves differently. You pick your fabric depending on how it moves, drapes, and breathes. That slinky rayon dress, it flows beautifully on the body. Those knit leggings, they stretch and recover. But quilting is a totally different mindset. We usually use what's called quilting cotton. It's a crisp, stable fabric that holds its shape well. It's woven tight and it doesn't have a lot of stretch. And you can see that it's printed on one side. And it is sold in widths between 40 and 44 inches. Now, does that mean you can't quilt with other fabrics? Of course not. There are quilts that are made of jeans, t-shirts, men's shirts. I've even seen them made out of curtains. There are also amazing art quilts that use silk and other specialty fabrics. But, and here's the key, those materials come with added challenges. To get the crisp results that we're looking for in quilting, you need to stabilize those fabrics, handle them more carefully, and more than likely adjust your technique. So if you're just starting out, do yourself a favor and start with quilting cotton until you've built up a little bit of confidence. In garment sewing, pre-washing is a must. Fabric shrink. And if you skip that step, that beautiful new dress that you just made might fit perfectly on the hanger, but shrink at least a size in that first wash. In quilting, it's a bit more relaxed. Many quilters skip pre-washing, especially with the better quality quilting cottons. The shrinkage that happens after the quilt is washed, it gives that lovely puckered texture that we call crinklification. Now, there are exceptions. If you or your quilt's recipients have skin sensitivities or allergies, or if you're using vintage or donated fabrics, you should definitely pre-wash. And many people choose to pre-wash fabrics with strong dyes like batiks or reds or blues, which have been known in the past to bleed. So in garment sewing, cutting involves curved lines, darts, armholes on pattern pieces or tissue paper. You pin, trace, alter based on body measurements. In quilting, it's almost always about straight lines and angles, squares, rectangles, triangles, basic shapes that need to be cut out precisely to ensure that everything fits together perfectly in the block. We use rotary cutters, self-healing mats, and thick acrylic rulers. It's almost like a geometry class with fabric. Sure, you can cut it out with scissors, but it's slower, less accurate, and hard on the hands. This next one usually trips up a number of international quilters. Garment sewing is largely in metric, especially if you're using patterns from Europe, Australia, or Asia. Many patterns will include both metric and imperial measurements, but they start with the metric. Quilting, it's all imperial. We purchase fabric in yards, half yards, and quarter yards, and we measure in inches. Half an inch, quarter, eighth, even sometimes a 1/16 of an inch. And unfortunately, there is no easy metric conversion for a 1/4 inch seam. So if you're outside of North America, and get comfortable with imperial. And that means investing in tools that have inches. We also use a whole language of pre-cuts, fat quarters, layer cakes, charm squares, jelly rolls, pre-cut bundles sold in sizes tailored to quilting. Now, if you're new to these terms, I have a whole video explaining quilting names, acronyms, and quilty codes. Check that out here. Now, when you're sewing garments, the seam allowance is usually 5/8 of an inch or 1/2 an inch. That gives you room to adjust fit and to finish the seams to prevent fraying. Quilting is a game of precision. The standard is a 1/4 inch seam, and it has to be exact. It can't be 3/16, it can't be 3/8, because simply if your seam allowance isn't correct, your blocks aren't going to line up. And even minor differences over a row of blocks can really add up. In fact, it can put your whole quilt out of square. So it's an important skill to learn, and I share all my tips and tricks in this video here. In garment sewing, a typical stitch length is 2.5 to 3, and you always backstitch at the start of a seam and at the end. In quilting, we use a shorter stitch, around 2.0, maybe even as low as 1.8. Any smaller and we can't get the stitch ripper in, but the smaller size keeps the seams strong, especially when the blocks are pressed and reworked. And we don't backstitch in piecing. Those extra stitches can cause bulk and throw off your seams. And once the seams are enclosed in the quilt sandwich, we don't need to worry about fraying. Pressing in garment sewing shapes your fabric. Pressing darts into curves or sleeves into that rounded shape. Hems into place, it's sculptural. In quilting, pressing is all about flattening. We press before cutting to remove the creases. Then we press each seam as we put the block together, usually to one side. This allows for nesting seams, which helps your blocks align, stay square, and your points stay sharp. Some quilters press their seams open, but it's not as common for beginners. And I've got a whole video on a really good darning technique that you can check out here if you want to learn more. Most tools that we use look the same between garment sewing and quilting, but they can be slightly different or we use them in a slightly different way. In garment sewing, you might use chalk, tailor's tacks, and fine pins with a glass head on them. Quilters will often use fabric-safe pens like a friction pen or these ones with disappearing ink to make their marks. Quilters often don't even need pins, especially at the block level. But when we do need them, we need them to fit through lots of layers. And we want the top of them to be flat. One, so that things can be pressed over top of them, but two, sometimes we mark them with numbers. And over at our sewing machine, we use different presser feet. There's lots of different feet in garment sewing depending on what you're doing, from straight stitching to darning to embroidery to edging. In quilting, we have a specialized foot called a patchwork foot, where the edge of it is 1/4 of an inch from the needle to help our seams stay consistent. And for quilting and binding, you're going to want to have a walking foot for quilting your final layers together. It helps feed the top, middle, and bottom fabric together evenly, and that will help prevent shifting and puckering. In garment sewing, you match your thread to your project, both in color and thread weight. And you can use universal needles with your woven and ballpoint needles with your stretch. And normally a 100-meter spool should get you through a project. In quilting, since we're working with a lot of different prints and colors and often in the very same block, we often use a neutral thread, like a soft gray or beige. These blend in without standing out too much. And a 50-weight thread works for almost everything. It can be in your bobbin, it can be the top thread, and you can use it in quilting. But you're going to need at least one of these 500-meter spools for all the seams and the quilting. Needle-wise, we use a quilting needle. that has a sharper point, and a size 75 or 80 is a good starting point and works with most quilting cottons. And here's the biggie. Quilting takes longer. With garment sewing, once the pieces are assembled and hemmed, you're done. In quilting, finishing the quilt top is just the first step. Next, you have to quilt it. You need to lay out the back, the batting, and the quilt top. We call this a quilt sandwich. Then you have to quilt it to hold all the layers together. Now, you can do that by hand or by a domestic sewing machine or on a long arm machine. And you're not done yet. Still, you have to finish the binding, which is that final edge finish around the quilt that holds it all together. Depending on the size, detail, and complexity, a quilt can take weeks, months, even years to complete. Now, with all those differences, do you know what the wonderful thing about quilting is? That you can make your quilt your way. If you want to use unconventional fabrics, go for it. You want to press your seams out? Give it a try. If you want to cut everything out or improvise a pattern or quilt with bright neon threads, you do you. Quilting is about making something beautiful that's useful and full of love. It's a community and not a competition. Whether you're making your first quilt or your 50th, you're part of something meaningful. And don't worry about those mistakes. So much is forgiven once you get the binding on. Now, one of the first videos I made on this channel was all about my beginner mistakes. And my best recommendation for you is to start small. You will learn so much when you make your first quilt. Make them on a baby quilt or a cuddle quilt size. Then use that as a springboard for your next quilting adventure. If you are ready to dive into quilting, I have a ton of videos, tutorials, and free beginner patterns to help you get started. Check out the playlist linked here and in the description box. Take care, and I'll see you next time.